Hey, it's Alex from Way Back History. Today I wanted to use the apolitical map to explore something that I neglected to show or talk about in the biography of Leopoldo Galtieri last year, which of course shows a slice of the apolitical world map, and therefore it's of course missing from the map itself. It's the South Sandwich Islands. And there's a very interesting reason for that and history behind it, which I want to explore today. For both historical times and present day, the map displays Britain's South Georgia entity alone, despite the South Sandwich Islands being politically attached to it in some way during all of that time. We'll go back and take a look at the history, but the reason that it's shown this way is because throughout history it's been treated as part of the Antarctic geopolitical sphere. In other words, the normal rules of geopolitics don't apply, and instead the rules of Antarctic geopolitics apply, which have their own history separate from that of world geopolitics. For over 50 years, this frontier has been defined as 60 degrees south latitude, at least de jure, but of course in practice things are different. They always seem to be, that's why this channel and this map exist. And in this case, it can be easily determined that the South Sandwich Islands do not qualify for inclusion in the main map the same way that other nearby territories or comparable near-Antarctic territories do. And that's because it's been treated completely outside of the diplomatic relations of the countries that have been involved there. Back in 1955, with Argentina undergoing internal turmoil, a naval task force was sent to the South Thule Islands group, part of South Sandwich. They landed on Thule Island and set up a semi-permanent station there, Teniente Esquivel. This later became the knowledge of Great Britain, which administered the South Sandwich Islands as a dependency of the British Falklands. At the time, South Georgia also had this status. However, Britain's failure to respond to what was essentially an invasion of its possession was the first hint that these islands, which are unpopulated except for any of these stations, were treated outside the normal diplomatic relations of Great Britain and Argentina, and therefore were treated as being outside of world geopolitics. However, about a year later, a volcanic eruption on neighboring Cook Island, also part of the South Thule group, forced the deconstruction and evacuation of the Teniente Esquivel station. By the end of January, the evacuation from Thule Island was complete. One instance is not a pattern. However, another instance, just over 20 years later, proved the island's status as a virtual annex of Antarctic geopolitics. In November 1976, just over 8 months after the military seizure of power in Argentina, led by the General Jorge Rafael Videla, the Argentine junta sent a military task force to Thule Island, where they constructed a larger base with a military component, Corbeta Uruguay. When the British government sent a naval task force to the South Atlantic, it appeared that the theory, clearly believed by the Argentine junta, that the South Sandwich Islands were treated as part of Antarctica and outside the realm of normal geopolitics, appeared to be wrong. However, the naval task force was just trying to scare the Argentines away, and in fact was under orders not to dislodge the Argentines from what was effectively British territory. Even after Britain changed governments, the situation did not change. And as Britain let Corbeta Uruguay become semi-permanent, it became more and more clear that the South Sandwich Islands were in fact outside the realm of normal geopolitics. Britain, while not happy about the base's presence, essentially considered it an Antarctic base of Argentina. Of course, the final proof of this would come 6 years later. In March of 1982, the Corbeta Uruguay base was still in existence, and in fact it had now been expanded and housed a small garrison. The Argentine military junta was by now led by the aforementioned General Galtieri, and on March 25th, Argentine commandos from Thule base landed at Leith Harbor in South Georgia. The commandos stowed away aboard the British island until Argentina's complete invasion of the Falklands on April 2nd, the day after their more well-known capture of the so-called Malvinas. On April 3rd, the Argentines also took over South Georgia, which the Argentines call San Pedro, something I neglected to mention in the Galtieri biography. However, the British station there fought valiantly against the ambush of the Argentine troops which had been laid out on the island for days, and those invading, both of which had been supported by the Thule base. As we know, Britain responded to the Argentine invasions. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, not only facing upcoming elections, but as I mentioned before, her government had also not done anything about the Corbeta Uruguay base, which had played such a big part in the takeover of British South Georgia, authorized a task force to take back South Georgia and the Falklands. On April 25th, the British took back South Georgia, and by the 14th of June, Argentina was surrendering in the Falklands. Islands. 4 days later, General Galtieri resigned, officially putting a period on the conflict. However, throughout the entirety of the war, even after Argentina had used the base to launch aggressions, Britain had done nothing about the Thule base. When the two parties contesting the islands fought a full-scale war over nearby territories, yet didn't involve the islands in the entirety of the conflict, that's the furthest proof that these islands are a possibly unique phenomenon. If you know of any other sub-Antarctic territories that are treated this way, let me know in the comments or shoot me an email at waybackhistory@gmail.com. I'll definitely look into it. I might do a video on the history, and I'll also update the map, which is only supposed to show territories that are outside of the Antarctic sphere of geopolitics. However, as far as I can tell, other similar places such as the French Crozet Islands or the South African Prince Edward Islands are treated as part of the normal geopolitical sphere and not as part of Antarctica like the South Sandwich Islands. Almost as if remembering to recapture them, the British did then send a task force now that the war was over, and on June 20th, Corbeta, Uruguay was closed as the same group who had surrendered South Georgia to the operatives from Thule Island back in April now were present with the British raiding party to accept the Argentine surrender on Thule. The base was closed, however it was not demolished. And for one final piece of proof that the islands are part of Antarctic geopolitics, let's skip ahead to December. The HMS Hecate passed by the Thule base, and when it did so, it found that the Union Jack had been lowered. The Argentinian flag had been re-raised. Nobody was present at the base, but it was once again claimed by Argentina. Nobody knew how long it had been up, and it was removed by the crew of the Hecate, but it just goes to show about the continued passive interest of Britain in the area, much the same as in their continental Antarctic base areas. The next year, in February, the HMS Ariadne, with its support ship RMS Tidespring, conducted a demolition operation of the base, lowering Argentina's future chances of making covert claims on the islands, such as raising a flag. The news of the base's existence and the demolition was not even unveiled to the British public until March 10th, whereas less than a year earlier, the proclamation that South Georgia was back in British hands became one of the most famous lines of the 1980s. Instead, here, there was no condition of war, and the British Defense Ministry merely said, "We haven't a clue what went on, and God only knows who it was. Scrap metal merchants, someone drunk in their cups, or the Argentine military." In other words, this was a much lower key incident over islands that appear to be outside the area covered by the normal diplomatic relations of the two countries. 2 years later, South Georgia was split off from the British Falklands, and South Sandwich, which had of course also been a dependency of the Falklands, now became a co-equal part of the territory of South Georgia. However, again, despite this, we've just seen an illustration of how throughout its history, South Sandwich has been treated outside of the diplomatic relations of both Britain and Argentina, and that maneuvers on the island have never led to war between the countries. And during the one occasion when war was occurring between the two countries, the islands didn't exchange hands at all during the conflict until after it was over. This makes South Sandwich an unusual and potentially unique case in the world of geopolitics, and that's also the reason why it doesn't appear on our world map or on our videos, as it's treated geopolitically as if it's part of Antarctica, despite being officially outside of the Antarctic Treaty System. I want to thank everybody for watching. You guys are what makes it all possible. We're now over 1,000 subscribers on the channel, so thank you to everybody who watches. And a special thanks too for anybody who's donated on Patreon. Big thanks as well goes to Toy Cat for featuring this map in one of his second channel Geopolitics videos. And I have to give him a lot of credit too for drawing attention to the map, so a huge thank you there. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting. Make sure to like, subscribe, and donate on Patreon. For now, I'm Alex. I'm out.